Hello, this month we are welcoming Jim Boyle from the class of 1986, who founded Sustainability Roundtable on Earth Day in 2008. Jim and his team help mid-sized companies achieve more sustainable practices through energy use. He hasn't always worked in this sector, but Jim sees tremendous potential in renewable energy, and today he will share that vision with us. Jim, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Kate. I'm so glad to be here.
So, in order to understand where you are today, one thing that I think helps is understanding some of the dominant influences on your life growing up. Can you share some of those with us?
Sure. I grew up on a hill in Wayland, a beautiful piece of woods, sort of out there in the Hicks on a dirt road. And I'm the son of the grandchild of Italian immigrants and the grandson of Irish immigrants. And my father and mother were entrepreneurs. And my maternal grandfather, Vincenzo Suma from Napoli, was an entrepreneur, and he lived with us. And so there was a lot of entrepreneurship in the Boyle household in Wayland.
That's great. And in terms of your parents, what were some of those values that you got sort of both from them and then also within your time at Nobles?
One thing my parents shared was a Catholic faith, and we were brought up devoutly Catholic. We had an uncle who was a Jesuit priest and a labor leader, somebody who had followed my father, who was first in his family to go to college, to Dartmouth, and then followed him to the Korean conflict, where they both served before that priest came back, went to business school, and then went into finance in New York, left that to become a priest. And my uncle, Father Ed Boyle, was a Jesuit socialist labor leader, and one of the principal ones in the United States. And I thought he was crazy. I loved him, but I thought his politics were crazy, and they were very different than my father's. And who is a conservative business person, but who greatly respected his younger brother. And they were a really interesting contrast, who really respected each other. And over time, I've recognized that my uncle's understandings and principled approach to collective leadership was very sophisticated and also very heartfelt and in many ways very effective. And so, like my father, I've come to better appreciate his perspective. So those were two very, very different influences, but it was all about serving others. The Jesuit ideal of being a man for others. And when I went to Nobles, there was a real intensity to the concept of community and to giving back to community. And that resonated with me as making deep sense. And, I did spend time living in DC and spend time living in the Bay Area and San Francisco, but I felt I wasn't in my community.
So can you tell us about those early career moves? You mentioned DC, San Francisco. What were some of the areas that you were working on?
Well, right after I went to undergrad at Middlebury College, and Middlebury is a wonderful place and also intensely about community, but it really is quite remote. And so by the time I was a senior, I was anxious to get out and see the world. And I remember having a map of the world and all the Middlebury schools on it and where my Middlebury friends were around the world. And so as soon as I could, after working to save money as a bartender, I traveled around the world for a year. And as I came back, I had resolved, on a mountaintop in Thailand that I was going to be a for the good lobbyist down in D.C., like Ralph Nader before he made some tragic mistakes. And I just moved to D.C., without knowing anybody and having been a very conservative Republican and seeking work with the Massachusetts delegation. And that didn't work at all. So it took me about 6 months to get an unpaid job. And I had to work full time at night and full time during the day. And I did that for 6 months. And that did work in that I finally got a job assisting Senator Kerry, with answering constituent mail. And that was really fascinating. But I knew I needed more education and training if I was going to make a contribution really in any field. Or the type of one I wanted to make. And so I came back to Massachusetts, went to law school at BC. Then I served as a federal law clerk. And then I went to a large law firm. And ironically, I ended up doing corporate environmental defense with the chairman of the firm, Bob Popio. And although I appreciate the fact in our adversarial system of justice, somebody must do corporate environmental defense, I was not the right person for that job. The clients deserve somebody who doesn't want to change the system to make it more difficult for the corporate environmental perpetrator. When Al Gore ran for president, I had been hugely impressed by him. He was sort of a rival of John Kerry in the Senate. He was a very thoughtful person who in 1992 was obsessed with two things: the internet and climate change. And boy, have they come to shape our world. So he was right about that. So I jumped at the chance to join his campaign after the vice president prevailed in the election, but lost in court. I really felt sort of free to get out of politics. I'll go back to the influence of my father and my Jesuit uncle, to stop sort of pursuing the sort of collective change and social justice that my uncle was so committed to, and instead go back to, just ordering my private affairs, successfully the way my father did so brilliantly. And so I was getting older, and politics was proving incredibly tough to make a big difference in, or any difference in. And so I went into business out in the Bay Area, living in San Francisco. And that was terrific. It was a lot of fun, sort of caught the end of the boom. And I was in corporate real estate, and it was actually out there from 2000, 2004, working with companies that I saw an opportunity for pre-competitive strategic advisory service in corporate sustainability, because this was really a fairly new paradigm of management that was deeply collaborative and super interesting to me. It just seemed a better way to organize continuous optimization and innovation, and a better way to animate it with a social purpose, and actually a sort of integration and integrating of my Jesuit uncle's interest in what might be called system optimization with my father's interest in personal success. Pursuing personal success through advancing system optimization was, for me personally, integrating, and therefore I could vector a tremendous amount of energy into it. But I was just working as a conventional commercial real estate broker on the corporate buyer side, because that was something where it was very entrepreneurial. You can go out and get the client, and then propose some transactions and represent the buyer, and it could be very lucrative. And it turned out for me to be lucrative for several years and fun. But one, I was missing home, and two, I met a woman from Boston that I fell in love with. And so we moved back to get married in 2004 on Martha's Vineyard, and it's so wonderful to be in the Massachusetts community and the Boston community.
So you moved back to Boston, you moved back to Massachusetts in 2004. What did you end up doing professionally at that point?
Well, I was still working in commercial real estate, and I was able to be involved, and I felt empowered to network, and I was meeting an impressive number of very progressive business leaders and CEOs who really were quite different than the stereotypical business person who was just focused on their business and wasn't supportive of greater investment in pro-social activities. So I created the Progressive Business Leaders Network, which is a 501c3, and I won the tax exemption to create an educational nonprofit focused on best practices in more socially and environmentally responsible business and the public policies that support it. And it was particularly this concept, Kate, of business leaders engaging to learn more about and advance more responsible public policy that was unusual, because obviously businesses regularly on the other side of that. Governor Patrick had just been nominated for governor. There was a big group of business folks, many women and people of color, which was fairly unusual especially back then in the business community. Our first meeting, we had 100 CEOs at the Harvard Club, and I actually got Senator John Kerry to come up from D.C. and join Governor Patrick in visiting with the group, and that really just made it all take off and grow into the fully independent and staffed nonprofit it is now, doing business as the Alliance for Business Leadership.
So you took Progressive Business Leaders Network and eventually founded Sustainability Roundtable, which is what it is today. In simple terms, or what does Sustainability Roundtable do?
Well, just to be clear, the Alliance for Business Leadership is still operating. It's a nonprofit focused on helping business leaders engage to advance, more responsible business practices and public policy. But the success with that nonprofit gave me the confidence to found the Sustainability Roundtable Inc., which is a for-profit, a mission-driven company that's dedicated to accelerating the development and adoption of best practices in more sustainable business. So Sustainability Roundtable exists to help sustainability executives and managers charged with advancing environmental social governance initiatives at companies to develop goals and drive progress towards more sustainable high performance in business. And we've been doing that now for more than 14 years with more than 80 Fortune 500 companies and global growth companies on a multi-year basis. And over the last 6 years, we've developed a particular strength in helping these companies develop and drive renewable energy procurement strategies as part of their global emission reduction strategies. And that's really been enormously energizing and fascinating.
You have two main services that Sustainability Roundtable provides. Can you talk a little bit about your decarbonization efforts and then your NZCB program?
Sure. So Sustainability Roundtable Inc. does have two business services. The first is the Sustainable Business and Enterprise Roundtable, which is a strategic advisory and assistance service. It's a outsourced ESG managed services for companies. And then the Net Zero Consortium for Buyers is a procurement platform, a confidential procurement platform, a confidential buying consortium of our members. And the Net Zero Consortium for Buyers focuses on bringing our clients like Autodesk and Biogen and Cisco and Akamai Technologies and Wayfair and many others together so that they can combine their buying power and achieve greater economies of scale and economies of intellect as well in the procurement of renewable energy solutions here in the United States and now in Europe as well.
What size companies are you working with? You just mentioned a handful of Boston-based companies, but you thought a lot about sort of larger companies and mid-sized companies. Can you talk about your thinking behind that?
Sure, Kate. That has been important to our ability to make a sort of outsized contribution as a small firm. some of our original charter members, like Apple Inc. and Hewlett Packard and Facebook, are among the largest companies in the world and the highest consumers of electricity. And they really pioneered what's called the Virtual Power Purchase Agreement back in 2011, 2012. And we were fascinated by that as a third-party advisor. But it wasn't a transaction that made sense for any but the largest companies that were looking for a financial hedge for the cost volatility of electricity in their data centers. And that's obviously a specialized group of companies doing a specialized transaction. But we saw that utility scale wind and utility scale solar was getting more and more economically competitive and commercially compelling, and that we thought that by 2018 it would become superior on a cost basis to natural gas. And at that moment, we knew the rest of our clients would be interested in it, and indeed the rest of the companies in the world would be interested in it. And that has all played out, which has been very exciting. These quote unquote smaller companies like Akamai Technologies and Biogen and Intuit, they'll only have 7 or 10,000 employees, and they'll only have 3 or 5 billion in annual revenue. Or they may have 10 billion in annual revenue, but they're not among the world's largest energy consumers, and they don't have large internal energy teams, and they don't have a need for a hedging strategy on the cost of electricity. So consequently, they need a different sort of transaction. And moreover, in order to command the most commercially compelling terms financially and in terms of contract structure, they need to combine with others to achieve something like a 100 megawatt capacity procurement. And so, because if they aggregate their demand for energy, even across all their facilities in North America, these type of medium-sized companies will only require maybe 20 to 40 megawatts of renewable energy capacity to mitigate what's called the Scope 2 emissions associated with their electricity purchase, and therefore be able to develop and drive towards ambitious greenhouse gas emission reduction plans that a lot of people have heard a lot about because they're quite public about them. So in order to be able to develop those goals and pursue those goals, they really do need help coming together with other companies so that they can cause utility scale renewable energy here in the United States and now in Europe. And that's where Sustainability Roundtable comes in, and in particular, where our Net Zero Consortium for Buyers comes in.
Okay, great, Jim. Thank you so much. And I'd always like to end sort of by asking, somebody who is in the business, who sees a lot of innovation going on with renewable and sustainable energy. Are there any particularly exciting opportunities or new technologies that you would like to see more mainstream?
I do find utility scale renewable energy, and in particular, utility scale renewable energy with integrated batteries, an enormously compelling business opportunity. The entire world electricity industry is undergoing a technology revolution from fuel-based energy to product-based energy. So we're moving from resource economics to manufacturing economics. It's a completely different paradigm of analysis and forecasting. They're completely different technologies, and they're what the world desperately needs. UNICEF is reporting that more than 1 billion children are currently at quote unquote deadly risk in the 33 most climate vulnerable nations that have done so little to contribute to the existential crisis that we all face and that all business stakeholders face, all investors, all employees, all customers, all suppliers, all host communities face the same existential crisis in human-caused climate breakdown. And a big part of a science-based response to that challenge is the move to renewable energy locally, at a state level, at a national level, and globally. And that is all occurring in real time. And the fact that the technologies involved have become commercially competitive or commercially superior in many instances to the incumbent technology, the fuel-based technology that we must move away from, means that we've got this sort of remarkable confluence of technology change, of market change, of political change, and I think ultimately cultural change. And so I would just encourage, well, put it this way, I wish renewable energy was at this juncture when I was struggling to find a career that, was one, commercially compelling, and two, made a positive difference in the world. And renewable energy is certainly both commercially compelling and certainly makes a positive difference in the world. So I'd really encourage Noble graduates to consider it just as seriously as they can, because I, for instance, hope my children go into it, because it could provide a lifetime of enormous success in its most important dimensions, which is, a sense of making a really needed contribution to the communities we live in.
Absolutely. So that's sort of that idea of the multiple bottom lines, that it's actually positive for business and positive for the world and the people in it. Well, Jim, thank you so much for sharing about the ideas behind Sustainability Roundtable and your role in it. And we know there will be some follow-up questions from our community, but we just want to thank you so much for your time and for the work that you're doing.
Thank you, Kate.